On August 7th, 1974, radio operators at Achik Tosh Base Camp listened through the night to transmissions coming from the summit ridge of Lenin Peak, 7,134 meters above sea level in the Pamir Mountains. The signal was clear. They could hear the wind. They could hear the push-to-talk button being pressed. And they could hear a woman reporting from the mountain. 8 women had climbed toward that ridge. Through the radio, the operators began to understand that something was going wrong. Each transmission accounted for fewer of the team than the last. The intervals between calls grew longer. The voice that remained grew shorter with each call. The signal stayed clear. The transmissions did not. By morning, the radio fell silent. No one answered. 8 climbers had gone up. None of them returned. So, what actually happened on that ridge? To understand how 8 of the most capable women in Soviet mountaineering were lost on that climb, you have to go back to what they were trying to prove, and who they were trying to prove it to. And if you want more breakdowns like this, where we reconstruct what really happened in the mountains, subscribe to Summit X and turn on notifications. In the summer of 1974, the Soviet Union did something it had never done before. It opened Lenin Peak to international climbers, and the mountain filled with people who, under any other Cold War circumstance, would never have shared the same glacier. Approximately 170 climbers arrived at Achik Tosh Base Camp from 11 countries, including the first major American expedition the Soviets had ever admitted. They were there under an atmosphere of political détente, which is a formal word for a thaw between 2 systems that still didn't fully trust each other. The American team included Christopher Wren, a New York Times correspondent who was also a serious climber. It included Arlene Bloom, a biophysical chemist and one of the most capable American women in high-altitude mountaineering at the time. And it included Molly Higgins, who later described the moment she first encountered Elvira Shatayeva on the trail into base camp. Shatayeva was standing on a boulder. She was ordering 4 Russian men around her. She was 36 years old, compact and muscular, with blue eyes, and when she turned to Higgins, she introduced herself in slow, careful tones. Her name was Elvira Shatayeva, and she held the title of Master of Sport, the highest classification in the Soviet mountaineering system. Her team was 8 women: Tatiana Bardasheva, Nina Vasilyeva, Irina Lyubimtseva, Lyudmila Manzarova, Ilsir Muhammadova, Galina Perekhodyuk, Valentina Fateva, and Shatayeva herself. All were credentialed Soviet climbers. 4 of them had already summited Lenin Peak on previous expeditions. These weren't women testing whether they could survive at altitude. They already knew the answer. What they were attempting in 1974 was specific and deliberate. Not just a summit, a traverse. The plan was to ascend the Lipkin Ridge on the north face and descend by the Razdolnaya route, a completely different line down the mountain. No pre-cached supplies waiting on the descent. No male climbing partners at any point. No assistance from men. Full stop. That last condition was the load-bearing fact of the entire enterprise. In 1974, the assumption that women required male support on serious peaks was still active and largely unquestioned, inside the Soviet system and outside it. Shatayeva's plan was an answer to that assumption, a traverse, unassisted, on a 7,000-meter peak. The man running base camp was Vitaly Abalakov, himself a master of sport and the designer of an ice anchor technique still taught to climbers today. He was the most authoritative voice in Soviet mountaineering, and he was watching from below. The climb began on July 30th. Early progress was strong. Too strong, as it turned out. 3 days into the climb, on August 2nd, Shatayeva radioed her husband Vladimir at base camp. He was a master of sport mountaineer himself, and he was the team's primary radio contact throughout the expedition. His memoir, published 3 years after her passing, is the closest thing to a primary record of what she said during the climb. What she told him on August 2nd was this: everything so far was going so well that they were disappointed in the route. It's a dry remark, and it matters. The Lipkin Ridge wasn't giving them the resistance they'd expected. Morale was high. The pace was strong. At that point in the climb, nothing about the situation read as dangerous. Then came August 3rd and the rest day. Shatayeva ordered the team to stop and hold position. 3 squads of Soviet men were approaching from below, moving up the same mountain on a different line. Vladimir, listening from base camp and reading the radio logs afterward, formed a specific interpretation of why his wife called the halt. He published it in his memoir. His reading was that she may have been deliberately slowing the team's pace to ensure the men couldn't catch them, couldn't be seen helping, couldn't later be credited with anything that belonged to the women. That interpretation is Vladimir's, not Elvira's. She left no written account of her reasoning. What can be said is that the rest day cost the team approximately 24 hours in a climbing window that was already narrowing. It placed them higher on the mountain later in the season than they would otherwise have been when the weather changed. By August 4th, the weather had started moving. Base camp commander Vitaly Abalakov issued a descent order to all climbers on the mountain. The men's teams obeyed and came down. Shatayeva's team kept going up. That same day, as snow began falling on the upper ridge, Shatayeva radioed Vladimir again. Her message about the snow has been preserved across multiple sources. She told him she was glad it was falling. The snow covered the tracks, so that no one could say the women had followed a trail the men left behind. That transmission is not a tactical report. It's a statement of what the climb meant to her. The snow wasn't a weather concern. It was a form of erasure, cleaning the ridge of any evidence that might complicate the record they were trying to set. Shortly after, a British biomedical scientist named Richard North encountered the team on the upper mountain, roughly 400 feet below the summit. He reported them as moving slowly but in high spirits. It was the last time anyone outside the team saw them alive. By that point, the logistics of the climb had already shifted. No descent camps, a narrowed weather window, 8 women above 7,000 meters, still moving up as the storm gathered behind them. They reached the summit on August 5th. The storm was already moving. The summit of Lenin Peak sits at 7,134 meters. The women reached it on the afternoon of August 5th, carrying full expedition loads because the traverse demanded it. There were no cache supplies on the descent side of the mountain. Everything they needed to survive the way down was on their backs at the top. By 5 p.m., visibility had collapsed. The descent route off the summit ridge was gone, swallowed by cloud and blowing snow. They radioed base camp, reported their position, and made the only rational short-term decision available to them. They pitched their tents on the summit ridge and waited for conditions to improve. The conditions did not improve. August 6th arrived with winds measured at 130 kilometers per hour. Temperatures dropped below minus 20 degrees Celsius, and that figure doesn't account for wind chill across an exposed ridge at altitude. Soviet sources would later call it the worst weather in the Pamirs in approximately 25 years. The mountain wasn't offering a difficult situation. It was offering a physiologically impossible one. The tents they were sheltering in were Soviet issue, cotton fabric with wooden poles, the standard expedition specification of the era. Against winds of that force, the cotton shredded, the wooden poles snapped. Rucksacks went, stoves went, warm clothing was blown off the ridge. The equipment didn't fail because the women misused it. It failed because it was built for a different category of storm than the one that arrived. 2 of the 8 teammates were now critically ill. The team had managed only a few hundred feet of descent from the summit before the deteriorating shelter forced them to stop. They were above 7,000 meters, without functional tents, in a hurricane, with 2 members unable to move under their own power. Below them, the rescue calculus was equally brutal. American climber John Roskilly and a Japanese team were attempting to climb up toward the summit ridge. At approximately 6,500 meters, a group of Japanese climbers who could hear the panicked Russian transmissions on the radio tried to push higher to help. The gusts blew them off their feet. They couldn't stand up. They were forced back down. The storm wasn't slowing a rescue. It was physically preventing one. Then came the exchange that sealed the team's collective fate. Base camp told Shatayeva directly that if necessary, the team should leave the critically ill member behind and save the others. The instruction was pragmatic and brutal, the kind of calculation that high-altitude rescue demands. Her response was recorded at base camp and later cited across multiple sources. They would not, she said, leave their comrades after all they had done for them. That answer has been read as a failure of tactical judgment, and it has been read as an act of loyalty that defines who these women were. Both readings exist inside the same transmission. What can be established from the logistics is this. By the point that decision was made, abandonment may not have extended survival for the remaining members by any meaningful margin. The storm was total. The shelter was gone. The descent route was still invisible. Every option on that ridge was moving toward the same outcome. The decision to stay together wasn't the moment the team lost their chance. It was the moment the mountain confirmed there wasn't one. Through the night that followed, the radio stayed open. Through the night of August 6th and into the morning of August 7th, Elvira Shatayeva kept transmitting. The men at base camp had their radios open. They could hear her voice coming down from the summit ridge. They couldn't reach her. The storm had made the mountain physically impassable. What they could do was listen, and what they listened to was the narrowing of 8 lives into 1, reported in real time from 7,100 meters. The transmissions didn't arrive as a single final message. They came in over hours, fragmentary and compressing, each one accounting for fewer survivors than the last. By dawn, only one voice was still on the radio. The reports grew shorter as the night progressed. The intervals between them grew longer. The men at base camp sat with their equipment and waited for the next signal, knowing what each silence might mean before it was confirmed. This is where the historical record fractures, not in its central fact, but in its details. What Shatayeva said in those final hours has been preserved in 4 different forms across 4 different sources, and none of them match exactly. Christopher Wren, the New York Times correspondent who was present at base camp that night, recorded her final words in his 1990 book as, "Please forgive us, we love you, goodbye, time." Magazine's contemporaneous 1974 dispatch, translated from Russian sources immediately after the disaster, preserved a different version. "Goodbye, we are going to die." A widely reproduced English account, sourced through Explorer's Web, gives a third version in which Shatayeva, transmitting alone, said she had only minutes remaining and bade farewell. A Russian-language source preserves what appears to be an earlier transmission in the sequence, in which she reported the team's losses as they occurred and identified herself as among the last. These aren't competing versions of a single sentence. The radio stayed open for hours. These are probably different moments from an extended sequence of transmissions, each captured by a different observer, each translated across decades with varying degrees of fidelity to the original Russian. No single version should be presented as definitive because no single version is. What is not in dispute across any source is the underlying fact. Shatayeva kept transmitting until the radio went silent. She had reported the team's losses across the night. She was the last voice from the ridge. When the storm broke, Wren and an American-Japanese climbing party pushed up toward the summit ridge. They found Shatayeva first. Wren had sat and talked with her at base camp several weeks before. He recognized her immediately. 3 more team members were found inside what remained of a tent, the cotton fabric shredded down to its frame. A 5th was found with her climbing rope. 2 more were found further down the slope where the wind had driven them. The 8th wasn't there. Her footprints led across the ridge and over the edge. They followed the tracks to where the snow ended. 7 recovered. 1 traced only to the point where the ridge stopped. Vladimir Shatayev was brought up to identify the women. He had planned to take his wife back to Moscow. He decided instead to bury her at the foot of the mountain in the Edelweiss meadow below Lenin Peak, with 4 of her teammates beside her. The other 3 were returned to their hometowns. The Soviet press didn't report the losses until after Wren had returned to Moscow and the story had run in the New York Times. The country's 8 best women climbers perished on a Soviet mountain, and the world found out through an American journalist. What happened on Lenin Peak in August 1974 wasn't an accident and wasn't negligence. It was a convergence, a route chosen to make a political point, equipment built for a different category of storm, a weather system Soviet sources called the worst in 25 years, and a team that stayed together because that was who they were. Arlene Blum, who was at base camp, put it plainly. The women were so very loyal to each other, she said. They stayed together until the end. The Edelweiss meadow is still there. The flowers come back every summer. Subscribe to Summit X for more forensic breakdowns of the disasters that history left behind, and watch the next video for another story the mountain never gave back.